on attend juste un petit moment. C'est Amarty a un souci, il est en train de se reconnecter.
We're just waiting for a few seconds, waiting for the final participant to connect up.
Exact, et c'est Rachid aussi. Et ça sera bon. Donc, Mounir, on commence dans 2 minutes. On attend encore 2 minutes.
Couple more minutes.
Ouais, notre ami de S2M a toujours un souci à régler et on commence, je te dirai.
Prévenez-moi 30 secondes avant quand vous allez commencer, que moi je puisse lancer le live.
C'est parfait. En tout cas, quand je donne le coup d'envoi, on attend 30 secondes encore avant de...
Super, parfait.
Merci. Je pense que c'est bon là, Mohamed, Marty.
Mohamed, can we go?
C'est bon pour toi? Essaye de parler.
Everything seems to be okay.
Non, on t'entend toujours pas, Mohamed.
Can't hear you.
Attends,
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me or not?
Oui, oui,
Yes,
mais
we can
très
hear you
bas.
now.
Très bas.
But your volume isn't very loud.
Je vais régler donc, le problème de micro.
Let me solve the problems I have with my mic. Hello, everybody.
Adélaïde, on peut commencer dans
Adelaide, I think we can start in 30 seconds. So tell us when you launch the live. I'm sorry for arriving late.
Aucun problème.
No problem.
Ce sont les aléas du...
Technology is very unforeseeable sometimes.
Voilà, je
So I'm
m'excuse
sorry
pour
for
ce
arriving
retard.
late once again.
Aucun souci.
No
Aucun
problem.
problème.
Vous êtes live.
Les aléas du...
Perfect. If
de la
you can
technologie.
hear me, I'm going to start. Can you confirm that you can hear me? Jalal, can you hear me? Perfect. Well, good afternoon,
Je m'excuse pour ce retard.
ladies and gentlemen.
This meeting is being recorded
So
today.
it's now time for us to start our meeting.
Vous êtes live.
Parfait, si vous m'entendez, je démarre.
If you can hear me, then I'll start.
Mesdames et messieurs, je pense qu'il est le temps.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's high time that we started our webinar. The theme is accelerating the take-up of electronic payments. There seems to be somebody else on the line at the same time.
Parfait, si vous m'entendez, je démarre.
Ladies and
Mesdames et
gentlemen,
messieurs, je
I think
pense qu'il
it's
est
high
le temps
time that we
imparti pour
started
démarrer
our
notre
conference.
conférence en ligne dans le thème accélérer
The
la
theme of this conference is accelerating the take-up of electronic payments.
Parfait, si vous
I'm sorry, there's a
m'entendez,
big
je
issue with the
démarre.
sound.
Mesdames et messieurs, je pense qu'il est le
Ladies
temps
and
imparti
gentlemen,
pour
I think
démarrer notre
it's high
conférence en
time that
ligne
we
dans le
started our
thème
conference.
accélérer
Mounir, il y a un écho, il y a quelqu'un qui est connecté en cours.
Il y a un souci, il y a un souci.
Parfait, si vous m'entendez, je démarre.
Oh là là, Mounir, c'est Mounir, il y a un souci, il y a un souci.
Mesdames et messieurs, je pense qu'il est le temps
On appelle le téléphone. Mounir, il y a un écho, il y a un écho.
Je ne parle pas si jamais.
The recording has stopped.
Ça, c'était Tarik. Tarik qui a le micro activé. Tarik, essaye
Tarik, could you please switch your mic off? We can't have several mics open at the same time. It creates a loop with an echo.
Oui, oui, et là, tu peux commencer. Là, tu peux
Try again. Let's try again.
C'est bon, mais
I think that should be okay, but please be careful. Make sure that your mics are switched off when you're not speaking, please. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think it's high time that we started our online conference. Now, the theme of this conference is accelerating the take-up of electronic payments. So this is a theme which is part of the kickoff to the first digital hackathon given over to innovation in the port sector in Morocco, Port Smart Challenge 2020. So I'd like to thank you all for being present here today. And you know that electronic payments account for 726 billion transactions in the world in 2020. And this is a figure which is rising considerably. And this is obviously a figure that emerging countries have to follow. So we know that in many regions of the world, we use money for small payments, but electronic payments are being used and more for all types of payments. And this is what the global reports of the consulting firm Capgemini says, and the bank Paribas says. We know that we have an increase of these electronic payments every year, and this growth is largely fueled by developing markets now, where the number of electronic payments has jumped by 21.6% in 1 year, against a rise of only 7% on the so-called mature markets. So in the section of inter-company transactions, so you know that we're seeing more and more digitalization of invoices and the use of virtual cards and other financial solutions, which are digitalized solutions. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has just accelerated the use of no paper payments and electronic payments. In Morocco, this is the case. So all of the stakeholders belonging to the ports ecosystem are a big challenge for electronic payments, because you know that it's very difficult to introduce a general electronic payments in the business world. And this is the case despite all of the advantages that electronic payments give. For example, the facility of exchanges, the secure dimension it gives to our operations and quick transactions. So therefore, the predominance of traditional payment cards is tending to persist. Why? Well, where are the blocking points coming from? What are the sticking points? Is it a problem of governance or is it another issue? So this is the discussion that we're going to have here. We have Mr. Jalal, who is Director General of PortNet SA. We have the Director of Payment Systems and Financial Inclusion, and we have Rachid Tari, who's President of AFFM and the Moroccan Observatory of Logistics Competitiveness, Mr. Brice Djouna, who's in charge of organization IT systems at CIH Bank. We have the ANP, and also we have HBS. We have Mikael NACIRI, who is the Managing Director of CMR, and Mohamed, who is the Director of ASMEX, and we have Yasmin Sahar, who was Commercial Director of Visa International. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your presence and your involvement in this discussion here today. So first of all, let me give you a brief introduction and let me explain the state of the art with regard to electronic payments in Morocco, and also take stock of the current situation on the basis of our experience in our business sector. So let me start with Jalal, who is Managing Director of PortNet SA. Thank you very much. You have the floor. Yes, thank you very much, Mounir. It's always a great pleasure to be with you. This time we're present in the framework of this wonderful event, this wonderful community innovative event, which is the launch of the Smart Port Challenge Hackathon. This is a really very specific event because this is a community approach, and this just confirms the efforts undertaken for several years, the efforts in terms of collective intelligence, and this has given rise to the PortNet platform, which is the fruit of collective collaboration. So indeed, you're right, one of the big challenges we have ahead of us, and one of the challenges that we're going to be working on this hackathon, is electronic payments. And you know that there is a direct link with fluidity of port transit and the smooth running of ports. So obviously this is conditional on three types of flows. Now, I might be repeating myself with regard to what I said this morning, but there are three types of flows which are some of the concerns of ports. So, for example, we have to optimize physical and logistical flows. We've made some very heavy investments in these fields, and data flows as well have to be optimized. So this is through the PortNet platform. And here again, we've really made a giant leap forward with the community and also with the increasing maturity of the key systems around PortNet, the customs systems, the different agencies in the port, the terminal operators, and all of the stakeholders who belong to the foreign trade community. And the third type of flow, which is very important, which comes back every time, it's the electronic payments flow, because you know that international transit operations are backed up by a lot of invoices that have to be paid, and these invoices concern, for example, administrative formalities, B2G, for example, but also payment for B2B processes, which are linked to a given service, a service provided by an intermediary, for example, a carrier, a freight forwarder, an inspection authority, a laboratory, and so on and so forth. And this is where we have enormous progress to make. We have to make a lot of effort, despite the rollout of this community platform, PortNet, which since 2017 has given us a one-stop shop for all of the stakeholders in this community, and enables us to share our invoices in one single place in a consolidated manner for all of our clients. These are foreign trade clients, obviously. And also this enables different stakeholders to make payments via the channels that they want to use. So it's a platform which connects up most of the stakeholders in the national payments markets. So we're talking about CMI and the different banks. And a lot of effort has been made within our community to promote these payments, with the true contribution of the banks and payment platforms, which have really helped us reduce the amount of paper used and reduce all of the difficulties around payments. So despite all of this, we still have a lot of obstacles to overcome, and things which are holding back the take-up of electronic payments for several reasons, in fact. One of the reasons is, and let me go straight into the different obstacles now, one of the reasons is that one of the main constraints is used to the ease of use within businesses and alignment with procedures. So the electronic resources that we have available today are not fully aligned with the business processes of companies, where a payment has to be authorized, for example, by or with a series of processes at managerial level. For example, we need the approval of the logistics manager, the financial manager, sometimes the managing director of the company. So these processes are very complex within companies, and therefore companies tend to prefer just to sign a check, or they prefer to secure their internal processes. Another obstacle is the complexity of the adoption and integration process with all of these traders and service providers. So this is a process today which requires a lot of effort. It's very complex, and we need to bring in IT solutions. We need more maturity of our IT systems in all of our businesses. And also we need to negotiate with the payment platforms and with banks. And we could also add to this, so we need to manage change, and there's a great deal of resistance to this change. Another issue is related to competitiveness. So in terms of tariffs and prices, and also the processing costs that the traders have to pay to the final customer. And this very often makes these payment methods less competitive with regard to free methods such as checks, which are a lot more competitive, or bank transfers. The third obstacle is the nature of the goods which transit through our ports. And whenever goods arrive in a port, obviously the countdown starts, because obviously the stays in ports cost a lot of money. So we have to optimize them, and we have to think about the reversibility of payments, because customs won't release the goods if the payment's not guaranteed, or if we don't have the money in account. So the same applies for handling operations. So we need guarantees for these payments which guarantee irreversibility, but also instantaneous payments, real-time payments. You know that Morocco has made a lot of effort in terms of infrastructures. I was saying this morning, you can go from Tangier to Casablanca in 2 hours by high-speed train. But when it comes to transferring money from bank A to bank B, sometimes it takes 2 days to see the money on the account. And this is a real challenge for us. And this is why we really have to adapt the current solutions, and we have to place more priority on B2B and B2G solutions. We have a lot of payment solutions that are suited for final consumers, but less so for businesses. So we have to think about this. And maybe today we might consider that electronic payments for companies becoming a real commodity, a real necessity to speed up trade operations in generally, but also to speed up trade through ports, because this holds back the delivery times and slows down the delivery times because of the staying times in ports, because of these payment issues. So maybe I'll stop there with regard to describing the situation, and I'm at your disposal if you have any more questions on these issues. Thank you very much, Mounir. So I think you've really given a very exhaustive picture of the situation and all of the efforts made by the communicating platforms, but obviously we have a lot of progress to make still, and there's still a lot of resistance to change. And I think we really do have to make a lot of effort. There's the issue relating to real-time transactions and real-time trade and exchanges. So now I'm going to hand over to Madame Mikael NACIRI, who's Director of Payment Systems and Financial Inclusion at Bank El Maghrib. So she's going to give her point of view of the issue that we're faced with today. So Hakima El-Alami, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much. Yes, this is a theme which is very close to our hearts at the central bank. You know that this issue of electronic payment means is a theme that central bank has included in its first strategic plan in 2003, where we had a strategic guidance for the development of financial inclusion and access to basic financial services for underprivileged populations, particularly. So the banks have worked with all of the ecosystems, and we had to promote electronic payment means. Why? Well, first and foremost, because you know that using these means of payment enables to reduce costs, and also we have less costs for managing mass payments. So we've quantified this reduction in costs, and we're talking about a decrease of about 15% in costs of these operations. So this is what fiduciary money costs in managing all of these operations.
Vous avez terminé, madame?
Have you finished, or has your screen frozen? We have a bit of a connection issue.
Madame Alami, vous êtes toujours là?
Mrs. Al-Arami, are you still there?
Madame Allen, est-ce que vous êtes toujours là parce que je ne vous entends pas?
I can't hear you anymore. We've got a lot of echo. I think there's a bit of a connection issue. Maybe, Mounir, we can move on to somebody else. Maybe Rachid Tari, who is president of the AFFM. Sorry, Mrs. Alami, I'll come back to you later on, but we had a bit of a problem. We couldn't hear you that clearly. But the electronic payment plan for you is strategic, and you want to include this in the Moroccan payment ecosystem. So we'll come back to you later on because we had a connection issue. So Rachid Tari, welcome. What's your reaction to the theme today? And what's your point of view? What's your perspective as president of the Observatory for Logistical Competitiveness? What's your point of view of this issue? Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation this afternoon. Thank you very much, Mounir. It's always a great pleasure to see you again, even if it's through a screen. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. This is a theme which is extremely important for us as representatives of the Moroccan Observatory for Logistical Competitiveness. I'd just like to point out that the Observatory for Logistic Competitiveness is always managed by the CGM Transport Federation, and as director of the Transport Federation for the CGM, it's a pleasure for me to be president of this observatory. So I'm going to give you an example now, which will enable you to illustrate this problem regarding electronic payments. It's true that today, when a truck arrives from Europe and it takes 3 days to arrive in Morocco, and then you need to certify a check or make a transfer, then it takes about 2 to 3 days more. So just think how long the whole process takes, because we have to deliver goods within a period of 3 days. But when it takes 2 to 3 days to process the payment, then obviously this lengthens the process considerably, and sometimes we have to have a certified payment or a bank transfer, and these payment deadlines are not in line with expectations, and this is not in line with the rest of the market. And Morocco wants to become increasingly competitive on the international trade market, so obviously everything has to move a lot more quickly than it does already. So my feeling with regard to this issue is that rather than having a traceable system with electronic payments, we're still lagging behind slightly, and we still use these systems which, well, for example, when you have to certify a check, I think it's always better to give examples, because I'm an operator myself in logistics, so it's always better for me to give examples, I think. So when it comes to certifying a check, to gain time, you prefer to take out cash and pay in cash, in fact, so as to avoid slowing things down, because to take a check and to certify it, sometimes you have to wait for the bank to be open, first of all, and then if you have a payment to make as of 3 p.m., then you can't do anything as of 3 p.m. to certify the check. So people tend to turn towards cash, and some operators do prefer cash payments, which leads to traceability issues. Obviously, this is not that great in terms of traceability, and also there's a risk of drift towards the informal market. And also there's another constraint that we have today with the current system. You know that we have to deposit or retrieve our securities. When you go to a bank, to take out money or to deposit money. So, you know, you have to do that by 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., whereas electronic payments, you can make payments 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you have a container which arrives in Casablanca port and that you can pay for electronically, then This means that the timelines will be shortened, and we have what we call mass time in ports, which is the waiting time in ports. So we can speed things up considerably, and you can retrieve your container the next day. Now, this is not necessarily possible today. And in ports, ports tend to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whereas the systems which are used to track electronic payments do not follow suit. Therefore, we have to wait. We have to wait for banks to open. We have to wait for a bank transfer. And as we already heard, sometimes you may have confirmation that you've made your payment, that you've asked for the transfer, but the trader, the shipping company, or the other stakeholders don't receive this payment on their account until maybe 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours later. So this leads to a whole series of issues. So this means it slows down the release of goods and longer lead times, longer stay times in ports, and also warehousing costs. And all of this is done because we don't have the possibility to use these electronic payments or to pay in quicker times. So this is something that we very often see in private markets. Very often when I pay an invoice, for example, when I pay my electricity bill or my water bill, I can pay that at any time of day from my home, whereas for B2B and B2G, unfortunately, these payment systems are not yet efficient. And I can tell you that for B2G customs, for example, if you want to eliminate the scheduling system and the ordering system and speed that system up, you are able to pay for your goods, but to pay for customs duties, for example, and to pay VAT and all of these things, obviously we can pay in record time because now we have the platform which enables us to make these payments. So that has sped things up considerably. So I'll come back to the details later if you like, because obviously the devil is in the detail. Thank you very much, Rashid, because it's true, it's very interesting to hear these very concrete examples, and these examples enable us to understand how the refusal or the fact that we haven't taken up electronic payments, how it affects lead times and the costs that build up over the whole process, which make us less competitive. And this leads to problems for B2B and B2G. Obviously, this tends to hinder our commercial exchanges. I think I'd like to come back to Hakima El-Alami because we had a few technical issues and this didn't enable to finish your intervention. Are you still there, Madam El-Alami? Yes, I am. So yes, what I was saying earlier on is we are working on the promotion of electronic payments. So this is one of our strategic guidelines since we adopted our first strategic plan at the Central Bank in 2003. And we've implemented a whole series of actions. We couldn't at the time talk about promoting electronic payment minutes as such, because we didn't have all of the infrastructures in place. We didn't have the modern payment infrastructures in place, which were adapted for using electronic payment means. So we started by turning towards a no-paper system for all of our trade systems and exchanges. So obviously, checks and transfers, we first of all had to set up infrastructures which would enable us to have no paper exchanges and also to reduce the lead times. We very often forget to talk about this. 10 years ago, it was extraordinary, in fact. 10 years ago, we had exchange lead times for what we used to call at the time physical clearance chambers. So sometimes it took about 30 days for certain securities. And we set up all of these infrastructures, and this enabled us to reduce the lead times. But now we're talking about D+2 for checks and D+1 for transfers. We're still working with the ecosystem to decrease these lead times even further now. And obviously, we need efficient infrastructures. So we've set up the infrastructures now, they're in place, and I've heard a lot about real-time payments, instantaneous payments. So in 2006, the central bank set up the gross settlement system for Morocco. So basically, this is a system to secure payments, and it was a system used to separate retail payments from wholesale payments. So all of these payment means are put into the system. I'm not going to go into the technical details and explain how it works, but basically what we're interested in is that customer transfers can be made via this channel. So this means that banks can, on behalf of their clients, and clients could be businesses, obviously, the banks can use these channels to make payments. And so we're talking about gross settlements and gross payments. So this means that the money arrives instantaneously on the account of the beneficiary at the beneficiary's bank. So these instantaneous transfers already exist and have already existed since 2006. So maybe this is something that we have to start communicating on a bit more. And maybe there are other payment offerings or other solutions. So there are a lot of banks here represented around the table. So maybe we should work more on the offering. Well, this is a great transition. Wonderful, Mrs. Alhami, because I'd like to come back to what you were just saying and the progress that you've made, because this is a wonderful transition. Because I'd like to put a question to Mr. Dries Benouna, who's Managing Director or Assistant Managing Director in charge of Technology and Organization and Quality at CIH Bank. Dries, are you with us? Yes, sorry, I'm just switching my mic on. Thank you very much. Go ahead. Welcome. Welcome, sir. Yes, thank you very much. So basically what I've retained from the discussion we've had until now is the need for instantaneous payments. And it's clear as private individuals, we can make quick payments because we have the infrastructures in place and it's like a ready-to-wear or ready-to-use a system, but each company has its own way of working, which is very often different to the way another company works. So all of these systems vary from one business to the next. So this can slow down the payment system considerably in some cases. Now, coming back to what Mrs. Hakimi Alami was saying about payment systems, it's true that at present we have made a lot of progress, but we still have a lot of progress to make. So we don't write so many checks anymore. And we are currently working on improving payment systems for traditional trade. And we know now that we can make instantaneous payments across Europe, and we should have that in Morocco by the end of 2021. So I think this will be extremely beneficial for trade. So we'll be notified immediately when a payment is made. Also, we've talked a lot about RTGS. Now, as Mrs. Alami was just explaining, this is designed for large amounts. It's not necessarily designed for daily or everyday transactions, let's say. So there's no industrial logistics behind this. So we need to improve on that. And also with regard to what's just been said, I'd just like to highlight one difficulty that we have when it comes to business payments. When businesses don't have enough cash to be able to pay, so sometimes you know that it takes longer to certify a check. Okay, certifying a check when you've got money on the account, that's okay. But when there's no money on the account to certify a check, it's quite a complicated issue, and it takes quite a long time. So in general, the challenge that we have ahead of us, and I think this is why you're taking part in this challenge, is for us to increase the take-up and accelerate the take-up of electronic payments. So how can we promote these electronic payments for B2B and B2G? So how can we introduce almost instantaneous payments in B2B and B2G? So basically, that's all I had to say as a general overview, and I hope if there are any questions, we'll be able to answer those questions later on. Yes, thank you very much for your contribution, and this notion of instantaneous payments is very important for transactions, and this is something we'll probably come back to in the discussion later on. So thank you again. Now I'd like to hand over to Tarik MAAOUNI, who is CIO of the National Ports Agency, and he's got his point of view on these issues. So Tarik, you're in charge of Organization and Information Systems, so I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I'm delighted to take part in this first edition, this first webinar of the Smart Port Challenge, which is given over to electronic payments. I think it's extraordinary to see what we're doing here and how we're bringing together all of these partners. And I would like to applaud you for organizing this exercise. Now, it's true that when we talked about this issue with Jalal a few months ago now, we wondered how we were going to make progress and accelerate electronic payments and accelerate the take-up of electronic payments, because we have noted that there are a lot of difficulties in the field, and people don't seem to want to take them up. Businesses don't seem to want to take up electronic payments. And we think that we need to accelerate the introduction of electronic payments. And this is what we've already described this afternoon. So you know that today everything moves very quickly. There's a lot of trade, a lot of exchanges of documents against payment, goods against payment, and things should be more synchronized, because the problem is this leads to slowdown in the timelines afterwards and lead times. So I think that technology plays an important role, first of all. So we need to have technology so as to be able to guarantee instantaneous electronic payments. So that's something that's missing. But there's another dimension which is also missing: habit, behavior, reflex, and mindset. We need the mindset of businesses. Sometimes we're talking about SMEs, which sometimes don't have the mindset very often. In fact, very often for them, they think that checks are a secure means of payment and that checks are very efficient and effective. But electronic payment means tend to be relegated to inferior position, because people are not, I wouldn't say they're mistrustful of electronic payments, but people are very wary and they wonder whether there's a risk with electronic payments or not. So there's a lot of reticence. And I think this can be explained by people's ingrained habits, which have been ingrained over several years. So in businesses, people tend to use checks. When I talk to colleagues about this, when I ask them what's the safest method, is it a check or a credit card? Very often they say checks. Checks are the safest method of payment. But in actual fact, it's the contrary. A check is a very risky means of payment and a very long means of payment. And it's easy to forge, for example. Checks present a lot of risks and defaults. We have no certainty as to whether there are funds on an account used to issue a check. So this is a historical thing, I think, because people have this habit of using checks, but they had some major disadvantages in using checks. So electronic payments, I think companies need to be aware of the fact that we can not continue to use checks because they're not adapted to today's world. And we've inherited, this is a legacy, in fact, the checks, we've inherited this practice from France or from other countries where there used to be a tradition of using checks. But now I think we have to think about, okay, we have to think about technology, first of all. How are we going to be able to make the tools fit the usage? And it's the clients who will decide finally. So how are we going to make clients want to use these electronic payment means? So obviously we're going to spare no effort at the National Ports Agency to help businesses and to help promote the financial ecosystem, find suitable solutions to rise to this challenge. Thank you very much, and I'm not going to be any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tarik. That was really useful. You've added some new notions here in the debate. You talked about this notion of cultural mindsets, the need to develop these reflexes, and we know that this is going to have an impact on competitiveness, it's going to have an impact on what Morocco has to offer to companies. We'll come back to these different notions, because, of course, this is not necessarily part of technological solutions, because here we're talking about mindsets, about cultural aspects. We're now going to give the floor to Abdeslam ALAOUI SMAILI, who's the general manager at HPS. I think you've all seen a message pop up on your screen with a survey, so please feel free to answer this survey. Abdeslam ALAOUI, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I'm extremely happy to be a part of this initiative. We're not talking about financial inclusion, customer experience, or retail, because for many years this has been the case. These are themes that we talked about over and over again. And the problem concerning a corporate payment, or whether SMEs or very small companies, you haven't been able to come up with a real answer. And all the participants, very experienced, were not able to find a solution. I wanted to share some figures with you. As you pointed out, here we're talking about a growth rate for financial transactions, so non-cash transactions, between 15 and 25% in terms of growth in volumes. But this is a growing market. And we know that we are undergoing difficult times, and we have to consider this as good news. Despite the crisis, despite everything that is happening around us, this is something that we should not forget. And this is something unique. Concerning electronic payment, if we consider trans-border transactions, we're talking about over $140 trillion. And 95% of this amount is made up of B2B transactions. And if we look at the situation throughout the world, most of electronic payment transactions have to do with B2B transactions. And we know today that here at home, we're not there yet. We've made a lot of efforts, and I know that all the participants around the table will agree with me. A lot has been done, of course. We've made a lot of headway, but with regard to corporate payment, we still need to step up our efforts. Now, there's the question of profit as well. And something that is important here is that where B2B really works well in terms of electronic payment, because, of course, this takes into account the concerns of SMEs, but the margins are much lower. We're talking about 0, 1, or 0.2% for products that are adapted to those amounts. But for P2P, when we're talking about money transfers, we're really talking about margins close to 5 or 6%. And then something else that I wanted to share with you. If you look at the corporate world and the credit cards, there are two main products. First of all, corporate cards and purchasing cards. The corporate card is a card that can be used by a company in order to pay for their daily needs. But a purchasing card is something that will enable a company to pay for goods and services that are of a different nature. And we can see the difference, especially in the mature countries. These cards are widely used. And if we look at purchasing cards, Usually the average transaction amount is about $20,000, and they have such transactions every week. Whereas for corporate cards, usually the average amount is much lower, but they are used as frequently. All this to say that companies do have specific needs. And this was singled out by the speakers before me. Now, we've covered a lot of different topics, but we can see that for companies, what is important is the question of cash flow and real-time payments, because the money has to be transferred in real time, debited and credited. And then the notion of traceability, and then fraud management, and the level of authority. This is something that was mentioned on several occasions, because we know that companies have very complex structures. This is something that can be managed. We can actually have an API-based technology, because now everything is well standardized, and we can imagine a national standard with a full integration with some ERPs that aren't 50,000, maybe we have, well, between 10 and 20. So we could actually imagine having plugins that could be used by companies so as to enable financial departments, the CEO or some buyers to circumvent all the red tape, all the paper work in order to make these real-time payments. And then something else, which I find extremely interesting with a real-time payment or electronic payment, and that is the possibility of generating more data. If we have a lot of incoming flows, this can actually generate a lot of data to activate transactions or activate the production chain. And this cannot be activated without electronic forms of payment. Something else, we have to work with interoperable system. All these systems have to be interoperable. You have to be able to make a transaction from a bank A to bank B. You have to be able to pay customs or the ports authority. So we all need to speak the same language. And then the notion of cost. Now, my colleagues pointed out that the cost of checks is zero. It's free. No, a check is not free. A check is probably the most expensive mode of payment. Well, the person signing the check might think that it's free, but they have to take into account the fact that it's going to take, 3 days to make sure that the money will be transferred. The money has to receive the check and that to process the check, and the check is definitely not free. And using cash is really not a free method of payment. Mrs. Alani alluded to this. We have some studies that reveal that using cash is additional income for a country. And then the rules for all participants. I talked about the 6 main themes, the challenges that we need to overcome for companies. But then we have to look at trade in general. We know that there are some major concerns, for example, authentication, confidentiality, and the business continuity is also extremely important, because this has to be available round the clock, 24/7. And to conclude, just a few hints. Today, we have traditional payment methods. We have fast pay methods, easy pay with biometrics, for example. And what we see more and more, and this really applies to our field, what we call invisible payment. And we would be thrilled to have, for example, stickers on containers. And all you need to do is just scan these labels or these stickers. And I think that for this challenge, you should just go wild and think outside the box. We have to think big, because this is how we will come up with a truly innovative solution. Yes, you are asking us to be bold. Here we've been talking about growing a market, that of electronic payment, the concerns of companies. We need to adopt a consumer-centric approach, companies need to be competitive. And it is important to be able to guarantee the full traceability of data. From a strategic point, this is very important. Interoperability and, of course, business continuity, this is crucial. We will come back to this in a minute. We know that this is extremely interesting. So let me give the floor to Mikael NACIRI now, who's the general manager at CMI, to ask you about what you think about these different topics. Mikael, are you with us? Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Now, this was extremely useful. But unfortunately, all the topics that I wanted to mention have already been mentioned by others. So I'm going to focus on those topics that I found most important. Well, you know, they did all the work for you, didn't they? Mr. MAAOUNI, I think, talked about people being reluctant vis-a-vis a certain number of payment methods or electronic payment methods. I think that today we are starting to overcome this reluctancy. This is something that we've been able to observe with this health crisis. You know that prior to the COVID, we felt that there was this mistrust. But with the new constraints, because people do not want to touch banknotes or coins, we've seen that electronic payment methods have gained a lot of ground. So credit cards and contactless credit cards, these are new habits, these are new payment methods that are here to stay. And they're really part of the ecosystem of payment methods. So this reluctancy, this mistrust is something that is slightly fading away. What we can see today, especially for B2B transactions, is this question of a permanent payment. Different operators want to see the money on their account before they can actually trigger the next step, for example, to release a batch or to provide the corresponding service. But today, we are talking about real-time data, real-time information. Data is sent in real time between different players. So we are working on this with PortNet and the ecosystem of port authorities. So we are enabling operators to have access to this PortNet platform. So this means that they will have access to this information. For example, they will receive confirmation that a transfer has been made, that the money is available on an account, on a card, that the authorization was given by the holder of the account. All of this information can be accessed in real time. And it's also sent to the platform and to the beneficiary. But we still have some players who are waiting to see the money on their bank account 2 days later before they actually supply the goods or the service. So we still have a question concerning these permanent payments. This has to be confirmed. Because once an electronic transaction has been validated, the goods should be released or the service provided. I've been listening to Mr. Tarik with great interest, and I had the feeling, especially seen from the CMI's point of view, what we are observing is that if we look at our ecosystem, this ecosystem is completely in tune with these new needs in terms of electronic payment methods. We have a lot of customers who use these methods for custom duties, for different payments to be made on the PortNet portal. We have many, many transactions. And I am a little bit surprised to see that companies are still writing out checks. for those transactions.
N'apporte pas de complexité particulière.
Because these are not complex transactions. Now, access to these methods are extremely simple. Payment methods are available free of charge, made available by banks. And we have a whole array of methods of payments that enable us to make these payments. So bank transfers, but when we're talking about these digital channels that are now available for companies, we have e-banking, web banking for banks. You also have credit cards that are issued by banks. And we also have the possibility of being able to pay directly via your bank account using this portal. So there are different possibilities for players to actually pay what they owe. What Jalal pointed out, if we look at the industrial fabric and the situation in Morocco, we have some companies who are extremely well structured, who are able to generate their invoices and their payment using their ERP tool. But then we have some independent workers who still use Excel spreadsheets and who do not have the right tools internally in terms of IT solutions so as to be able to guarantee a seamless process. So we really have to make great efforts, and companies have to make great efforts to acquire these technologies and to acquire these modern tools compatible with different methods of payment. If we look at what the CMI is doing, we're trying to connect the different digital channels to act as a link between the ecosystem. For example, PortNet. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a stark increase in the integration of these different players. Now we are working with PortNet and with the ANP. For the control labs, but for shipment companies as well, who are currently integrating this platform. So we can see that things are really moving forward. It's a dynamic environment, and to guarantee this seamless process, especially for goods that transit via the ports. And we also have electronic payment methods at the level of the ports themselves and the warehouse operators. So we know that this is currently being implemented. Concerning the CMI, the key success factor, if we really want to speed up the uptake of these electronic payment methods, we need to offer a whole array of solutions, but with a single platform, with a standard access or standardized access to the invoices to be paid. And the example of PortNet is an excellent example, because with this portal, we have the entire ports ecosystem that is now fully integrated. This enables us to multiply the payment possibilities between different players. And the PortNet system is also something that we're trying to cut and paste. For example, we're working with the Ministry of Justice, with the different courts. We're trying to apply a similar system. So we can see that there's a real evolution if we look at the solutions made available to companies. Thank you very much, Michael. I will give you the floor in a minute because, unfortunately, we are running a bit late. So we still have 2 other speakers. Let me just finish and conclude on what I was saying, just one last sentence. In relation to payment methods, we've been talking about purchasing cards and corporate cards. And I think that banks have to make additional efforts for their SMEs and offer some solutions, for example, in terms of credit cards or digital solutions that really meet these needs. If we consider the offers of banks, the packages that they offer, in many cases, they offer these different payments solutions. And now we had a representative of Visa with us, and we know that we have solutions that work really well today. And this really enables us to meet the needs of companies by providing these technological solutions with these bank credit cards that have a higher thresholds. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, and I don't want to hog the mic. Thank you very much, Michael. Well, yeah, at the beginning of your presentation, you said that all the other speakers had already said everything, that you were going to be really short, but apparently it wasn't the case. But it's extremely interesting what you said, this change in mindset, which was actually accelerated by the COVID crisis. You talked about the need to multiply payment methods, but we will come back to this topic. And now, we're going to give the floor to Mohamed Rifi, Vice President of S2M. I would like to have your opinion on this. I would like to reassure you, those who are following us, please fill out the survey, the questionnaire that was sent to you.
Thank you very much. I think we've had some very rich discussions already, which has made things a lot easier for me, to be honest, because a lot of things have already been said. So I'm very delighted to be here today once again. I'd like to extend my warmest congratulations for this initiative. Now, I've been listening to the different speakers here this afternoon, and when listening to the speakers this afternoon, I realized that it's not difficult to understand that we are really faced with a need rather than in addition to an opportunity. If I take the examples mentioned by some of the colleagues, such as goods and trucks arriving in the ports, and we need to speed things up, it's not difficult to understand that these goods will have to stay in ports, and the longer it takes the companies to make a payment, then obviously the higher the cost of the storage and all of the logistics activities around this. Obviously, we know that the company has to bear these costs, and this will then add to the cost price of the goods. So this will then be passed on to the tariffs. And so the problem that we're trying to solve here today is a very complex one, and it is a logistical issue. But at the end of the day, it will impact the sales price for the final consumer. So that's important to point out. What I'd like to mention as well, just to make the transition with the actual payment and cash. We've talked a lot about cash in this webinar. It's important to note and to point out that if it takes us too long to find an instantaneous solution, then the more cash will prevail, and cash will obviously remain the prime means of payment. And I think that this is not one of our objectives. It's not the objective of the stakeholders in this ecosystem, or it's not the objective of our country's foreign trade policy. We want to change paradigm, and we want to tend more towards a cashless economy. Now, to come back to payment means, we confirm as well that the payment ecosystem in Morocco, as it exists today, for the B2C sector is resilient. It's an efficient system. Through the examples that we've mentioned, we can see full well that we've capitalized on this ecosystem to create usages for B2B. Now, obviously, there are a lot of advantages, particularly the advantages in using credit cards, but we know that there are certain limitations for business use or for instantaneous payments. Now, obviously, we can capitalize even more on this B2C ecosystem, and we can propose other usages, and we'll be able to talk about this later on with Madame Hakim Al-Mali. We can talk about new payments means with these electronic means of payment. Obviously, these are payments which are arriving on the Moroccan market now. And thanks to this, altogether, we can take a look and try and define the usages that we could define for B2B payments. This is something we've seen in other countries, not just ours. These means have proven efficient. So there are some Moroccan businesses who have contributed to these projects. And I think it would be interesting to try and see whether it's judicious to implement these projects in Morocco so as to respond to the needs of B2B payments and B2G payments. Now, when it comes to another point that we've talked a lot about, instantaneous payments, we're delighted to see that the platform, which will enable us to manage all of these payments, is up and running or in progress. So this is a platform which should be inaugurated next year. So it's very important to anticipate on this right now with all of the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So we all as stakeholders around this table, all of our participants, maybe all of the relevant stakeholders have to anticipate on this, and we have to think about how we're going to integrate this in the platform and how through this platform we can propose different interesting usages, not only for consumers and private individuals, but also for businesses through banks and payment institutions. Obviously, we have to anticipate on this. We have to do a bit of forward thinking. So instantaneous payments are going to be a new thing in Morocco. It's not new in other countries. Even in some African countries, in France, this has existed since 2018. In Sweden and the UK, these systems were introduced even earlier in 2012 or 2013. And we are a company operating in the payment world. We've contributed to these integration projects, and we have offered usages through innovative channels, through mobile wallet, for example, mobile wallets, and there are other countries as well who use the blockchain technology to integrate this platform to allow for this instantaneous payments. So they have to manage the whole process, obviously. So altogether, we have to capitalize on our international experience and these international projects, because there are some companies present here today who've contributed to these international projects, and we have what it takes to contribute to this Moroccan issue, because I think it's really a big challenge for us nationally speaking. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you very much for talking about the resilience of the ecosystem as a whole and the need to capitalize on all of these systems and practices, particularly in B2C, but also to take advantage through this ecosystem of the requirements of competitiveness and the need to adopt innovative solutions. Now, Mrs. Yasmin Sarah, you are commercial manager of Visa International. No, that's not the case. In fact, we've lost a participant along the way. So now it's time for questions. So please be very brief in your questions. We need to be able to talk about the poll, the results of the opinion poll, and take questions from all of the participants. So the question is as follows: what difficulties are encountered, and what are the main challenges to rise to generalize payments through digital channels for all of you and for all of the stakeholders? So as I said, it's up to you now. So please be relevant and brief. Thank you very much, Mounir. So what comes out of the poll and what we see on a daily basis with the different stakeholders, I agree with what's already been said. In fact, we've made an enormous effort already in Morocco, and it's true that the economic operators are increasingly demanding. They say that it's not normal for them not to be able to have these instantaneous payments, for example, without moving around and without going to the customs, without going to the port. And the problem is this handicaps them because there are extra costs incurred for them. So I'd like to come back to what Mrs. Alami said. So we do have real-time systems already in Morocco in our banks, but the problem is we don't have any end-to-end products which are offered to the final customers or to businesses that could use these systems and make real-time payments. So I think this is an idea that is very useful that Mrs. Alami talked about. So the banking community needs to take this up, and we need, for example, PortNet or other companies to make online payments without having to move. Another issue that we have today is the fact that we don't necessarily see what final customers have to do and what businesses do. They have to go to an agency to open an account, for example. They have to sign a contract, maybe just to increase the ceiling for a credit card. They always need to go into a bank to be able to change their packages, and it's really it's a bit of a deterrent, and it prevents them. The environment is very difficult. It's manual. You have to go and see your account manager. You know it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to sign an amendment to your contract or sign a new contract. You're going to have to sign an insurance contract that goes with it, and so on and so forth. So what we want is for companies to be able to do this online and to do all of their banking online. This is a high expectation that our customers have to be competitive on the international market, because this is what happens already on the international market. But in addition to that, there are certain regulatory obstacles. People still require stamped invoices, and this is an obstacle. Businesses say, I absolutely need a stamp on my invoice from whoever, the customs authorities or whatever, because this is a requirement. And if you take the risk of not having a stamp on a document, you might be handicapped. Another point is industrialization of payment projects. For example, if you're a business or a trader, and if you want to connect up to electronic payment systems and you want to offer electronic payment systems to your customers, it's very difficult to do that. The idea is to industrialize this and to standardize it on the market and to make it easier for companies to enroll. And I agree with what we said about maturity in terms of invoicing systems and the fact that you can do trade with others. And I think we have a lot of effort to make on this field. And I agree with what was said about the fact that we need a national effort. This should be the priority of the entire banking community, the El Maghreb Bank, and all of the banking community. And I think we're really on the right track. Thank you very much. So industrialization and more vitality and federation. We need to federate and bring together all of the stakeholders. Now, Mrs. Hakima Alami, what are the problems and the challenges that you have to face? Thank you very much. I just wanted to add a few points and to explain further everything that's been said. With regard to the figures, we talk a lot about using checks. And I've looked at the figures. I wanted to share a few figures with you. 2019, just to focus on 2019, we had trading of total number of transactions. When I say the total number of transactions, interbank, 272 million operations for value of 3.597 billion. So for all of these transactions, those that prevail are bank transfers, and bank transfers are ahead of checks now. This has been for the 4th year running. So I'm talking in terms of numbers now. This is followed by cards with 28%. So these are the figures that you'll be able to consult in our latest report on payment means published by the central bank. We publish a report every year. So this means that for all of the effort that's been made, you know that a lot of effort has been made, but I think we are now seeing the results of these efforts. It's taken a lot to change people's mindset. It's taken a lot to make people change their payment means. It's true that customers, when they see that there's an interest for them, then they will use these methods. And bank transfers, for example, have now pipped these other means to the post, and they're ahead of the other means. And it depends on the amounts. Obviously, there are cards which are adapted to lower amounts, but when you're talking about big amounts, it's another issue. So there is a change in mindset. And now for 4 years running, checks have lost ground. I think now they're in 3rd or 4th place. And that's an essential issue that we have to bear in mind. And this is something we have to bear in mind. I was saying that there's another message. We've done a lot. The central bank is pushing for a lot as well. Instantaneous transfers, for example, in the retail trade. This is something that was included in the GSM agenda for the central bank. And we are tending towards this now. But obviously we had our programs which were already in place, but COVID has disrupted all of this now. And normally in October 2021, we should be introducing new choices for all of the stakeholders to use electronic payment means. Thank you very much, Hakima, because we only have 15 minutes left, and I'd like to really go around the table and ask this question of others. What are your ideas on this, Rashid? Thank you very much, Mounir. So I think the key word is instantaneous. This is very important. This is what we're looking for. We want instantaneous payments because, as I was saying earlier on, yes, it's true that when you think about the global system, as Mrs. ALAOUI was saying, checks now are further behind bank transfers and other types of payment. I'm not really a technician in banking, but all I can tell you is that to date, we know that small and medium-sized businesses who operate in the different ports always use checks because bank transfers, as they're not instantaneous, we lose a lot of time. So when you receive a bill from the maritime company and the boat has already arrived in the port, then you need 24 to 48 hours. And these 24 to 48 hours are very important. Let me give you some figures, because it's really important to talk about figures. When you've got the port of Casablanca, which has 1 million... Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you.
Merci, Simone.
Yes. Well, as I was saying, that the port of Casablanca receives about 1 million containers in import and export. Can you imagine 1 million containers? Some of them are waiting on the quays, some of them are waiting to leave, and some of them have to wait for more than 7 days, and we have a lot of warehousing costs. And I'm delighted to see this keyword, which is instantaneous payments. So this will enable us to overcome these issues. It's true that during COVID, I wouldn't say thanks to COVID, but during the COVID period, businesses have changed their mindset and changed their habits slightly. And businesses have started to use more electronic payments, and I hope that we will be able to mainstream this as much as possible, because it's true, you've got the National Ports Agency. You've got the inspection authorities, but we don't have Masamaroc, we don't have all the maritime companies. I know that there are lots of maritime companies that are negotiating commissions, because there are commissions on these transactions which are very high. We're talking about 5 to 6%. So you can imagine if you've got 10 containers and you're paying 200,000 dirham and you have to take 5% commission on those amounts. These are sizable amounts and they should make us think. Thank you very much.
Alors, pour ne pas laisser cette information
Okay.
erronées se diffuser. Alors, les
So,
tarifs ne sont pas de
we
5.
have to be clear about the figures. We're not talking about 5%, but 0.5%. So just to correct you, so it's 10 times cheaper than what you just said.
Alors, justement,
Désolé, monsieur Nassiri.
I'm sorry, that's
non, ça c'est SMAILI.
that's what I thought.
Mikael, s'il te plaît, reviendra sur
Mikael, maybe you can answer that later on. But thank you very much, Rashid Tari. I've understood that you're all for COVID. No, that's a joke. Sorry. No. Dries Benhayoun, are you still there?
Oui,
Yes, I'm here. What's your feeling on everything that's been said? But please be brief because time is marching on. So what's your reaction to everything that's just been said? And also what's your feeling with regard to the issues and the problems that we have to solve here? In a few words, instantaneous, customer experience, and obviously commission. We need cheap commission, so instantaneous payments.
Facture du CMI et virement instantané qui arrive, paiement.
So instantaneous invoices, and I talked about ceilings as well, or heard people talking about ceilings. You can change your ceilings remotely, and if you want to do, you can do it. So it has to be fluid, quick, and cheap. So it has to be quick. So obviously, you know, in electronic money, the tariffs are cheap. Yes, it really has to be a market project where everybody takes part. We have to have a community approach, and obviously we have to make sure that everybody shares and takes part in this approach, and that everybody's not working in silos.
Voilà, merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Perfect. Thank you very much. So now, who do we have? Tarik, thank you very much. I think things are becoming more and more explicit now that we've had all of these different interventions and contributions. We're talking about B2B payments, more particularly for relatively high amounts, because as we've already explained with Mrs. ALAOUI, for small amounts, cards work very well and transfers work very well, so there are no problems there. But as soon as we have larger amounts, then there are certain issues, and we don't necessarily have the suitable payment means. And very often people tend to prefer checks in that case. So I think we have to work together on this to find really suitable solutions. And I'm sure that we will be able to find some suitable solutions to these issues, particularly since we are drawing on your collective intelligence here. And I'd like to thank the participants who are connected up today from across the globe to listen to this webinar, and who will probably have some wonderful and interesting ideas to offer. So I think that's basically, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming back to that. This is very important. It's a question of culture and change management. So I'd like to come back to the same issue with Abdeslam ALAOUI, the challenges that we have to solve. Well, let me answer in two parts. First of all, with regard to it being a market project, I think we all agree on this. It has to be a collective project. We have to have a market project, and we have to standardize the project. We have to make sure that all of the stakeholders are playing their proper role. So I don't think there are any problems with that. But then coming back to the issue at stake here today, there are three elements: instantaneous payments, the customer experience, and the cost. And for these three levels, I think all of the participants have said we have to really think about costs, because when it comes to costs, we only look at the payer and the payee, but we don't necessarily look at all of the intermediaries in the chain. And it's true that very often when you innovate you have to really shake up the model, and you have to break down the barriers and think outside of the box and think whether these costs couldn't be shared by all of the stakeholders. Because if you want to move more quickly, if you want data, then there are certain people that will take advantage of these electronic payments, and they're not just the two players at the end of the chain or both ends of the chain, so the payer and the payee. There are different companies, CMI, and all of the stakeholders who are here, the technology stakeholders. We know that there's some very interesting solutions that have been implemented abroad. And I think I'd like to invite all of the competitors to really let their imagination run loose and come up with some innovative solutions. Now, Mikael, you have the floor. But please be briefer than before. Mikael, are you with us?
Mikael, tu es en mute. Ouais.
You're on mute. Yes, I'd just like to say that I fully agree with everything that's been said. And I'd like to agree on the key success factors, customer experience, which has to be as fluid as possible. We have to integrate the IT systems of the different stakeholders. If you look at the IT system, PortNet, it's connected up to the National Ports Agency, to the ONSSA, to the customs authorities, and so on and so forth. So you can integrate. So there is a great deal of integration for the IT system used by PortNet. And I think when you look at what our exporters and importers do, those who use the PortNet services, or when you look at the ecosystem in general, we do have a very large range of companies, multinationals and small SMEs or SMEs and different size players. So obviously the solution varies according to whether you're a multinational or according to your size, really. If you're a small company, if you're not very well structured, the process will be completely different to that of a multinational where you have the 2,000 decision makers, for example. And then there's another issue that we need to touch on, which is the offer made by the banks for corporate profiles, whether it's credit cards or e-banking systems or m-banking systems provided by banks. There's a problem with the ceilings, which is a recurring issue today that we even see in B2C payments. For example, today, if you want to pay for a school or a foreign mission in Morocco here today, we very often have a problem with the ceilings, even if you have the money on your account. So I think that's an issue. So we have to think about how we can solve this problem with the banks and the solutions that banks offer to different companies. And there's another point which I think is an important one, and which we won't address solely from the point of view of electronic payment, but it's true that when we talk about reducing the use of cash, obviously we have to have appropriate solutions which will enable us to do without cash, but we need some very brave decisions to stop the use of cash in B2B transactions or even B2G transactions. I can't understand that people can pay millions of dirhams in VAT in cash. It's crazy to think that that's the case. So I think there are some very brave decisions that need to be taken, but obviously these decisions are not necessarily implemented. And we really do need to reduce the use of cash. Maybe we should tax the use of cash. That's an idea that I have, and this is a point that I'm particularly attached to, because we want to ensure electronic transactions, but cash is a big competitor. People who pay in cash get the impression that it doesn't cost anything, and therefore they won't have to pay for the use of cash, to pay for their transaction in cash. But in fact, they might be asked to pay for commission on transactions. So the CMI, Visa,
This meeting
banks,
is being recorded.
Les tarifs que l'on propose.
and all of these entities. I'm sorry, that was the computer.
J'ai comparé les tarifs, les
So I was comparing prices and comparing the offer that we make to businesses through the PortNet solutions, comparing that to what is done with your counterparts throughout the globe. For example, we have to benchmark ourselves with regard to what exists elsewhere. As I was saying, we're talking about 0.5%, and there's a cap at a maximum amount. I've seen the tariffs in force in Asia, in the well-known ports in Asia and the US. Card payments is 1.75%, so more expensive. So thank you very much for this explanation. Now, Mr. Rifi, I think there's a consensus that we need instantaneous payments and we need to work on the customer experience, the fact that this is a market project. And in relation to this point, and to talk about a point that was raised by Mr. ALAOUI, we have to include the fintechs and the startups in this project, because I think they will have some very good ideas. And I think this is really the objective of this project and this hackathon. So we're very excited to see the results and to see the ideas that come out of this and the ideas proposed by the different participants. I hope that the discussions we've had will enlighten you and inspire you. And I hope that, well, you know that you can count on our support to help you through this hackathon. Yes, thank you very much for this explanation, and thank you very much for sticking to the time. I'd just like to share some data with you, some data from the poll. Do you think that the development of electronic payment means instantaneous payment means for B2B and B2G in Morocco will have an impact on our competitiveness and on port lead times in general? 87% yes, no 6%, no opinion 8%. Second question, do you think that the current electronic payment means available are adapted to the context of B2B and B2G payments for import and export transactions? 29% yes, 51% no. A majority of people said no, and 21% no. Are there any obstacles for the adoption of electronic payments? 47% yes, and 19% no opinion. Have you ever used electronic payment means for your company for payment of ports and import-export? I'm sorry, I didn't get the figures. And the final question, have you made any lead time gains thanks to electronic payment? 10% no, 30% no opinion, and yes for the rest. So this really goes in line with what you've said now. Jalal, do you have any reactions to this? Well, since we're drawing to the close of this panel, I'd just like to say that the objective of this panel was to ask our panelists and all of those who are going to support our challengers to have an overview of how we can support them, because there are a lot of very interesting things that are going to be promoted in the framework of this challenge. So I'd like to hand over to HPS, S2M, and to CMI and the different partners so that they can explain how we're going to support the participants in this hackathon. No problem. Could you be concise and obviously answer the question directly? Thank you very much.
Merci. Donc, nous mettons à disposition des différents concurrents une plateforme avec...
Thank you very much. We have a platform that we can make available to the different participants with APIs that can be used by the different programs that will be designed by the participants. And if we look at the mentors, and I'd like to really insist on the notion of business model. We shouldn't just stick to business models where we're trying to get some commissions left, right, and center. People believe that it's free, but it's actually quite expensive. This means that the people who are paying don't know that they're paying. Those who are not paying, they don't know that they're not paying anything, that it's free. So I believe that it's important to bear this in mind. So a technological assistance that will make it possible to have access to the Moroccan ecosystem. Thank you very much, Abdeslam. Mrs. Hakima El Alami on the same subject. Mrs. Alami? No, I forgot to switch my mic on. So as I was saying, the central bank is trying to provide some support in the framework of the digital transformation. We've taken a certain number of measures with a one-stop shop so as to provide support in the framework of fintech, everything that has to do with regulatory questions. All the regulations that govern electronic payment methods. And this is exactly what we're talking about, because we need to be able to answer all of these questions, and also the notion of compliance, to make sure that what we are doing is compliant with the regulation. Thank you very much for this very clear answer. Driss Benouna for CIH Bank. So we will try to debunk this notion of banking complexity. We have an in-depth knowledge of the digital world. So we have this expertise that we can make available. So we will make this expertise available. It's not really a technological support per se. Mounir. Sorry, I forgot to switch on my mic. So thank you very much for this answer. Mr. Rifi, the challengers can actually rely on our mentoring and our support at CMI. We know that according to the topic under consideration, we will make ourselves available and provide you with all the support that you need. Thank you very much. I had a look at the different questions, and I can sum everything up. No, we forgot Mikael. Now, Mikael, he actually took the floor quite extensively, so I didn't want to give the floor back to him. Now, the CMI is at the disposal of all participants. Our experts are here to provide you with the necessary support, whether we're talking about credit cards or digital payment methods. We have teams available to try to overcome or debunk this myth of a complexity. We know that we have an infrastructure that involves both banks and the different players, companies, producers, and so on. So it can be interesting to share this expertise with all these stakeholders. Thank you very much, Michael. And really am sorry I forgot to give you the floor. We know that a lot of companies are with us today, and they're finding this discussion extremely interesting, and we have a lot of recurrent question. Of course, real-time payment, yes, but electronic payment methods have to be cheaper. So we know that your answers will act as a conclusion. Who wants to take the floor first to answer this question? So I'll shoot first. Well, cheaper, according to what? We have to find the right price. Now, people are talking about costs. So we have to avoid additional costs. Yes, but we have to find the right balance. We have to find the right price. If we keep a container in the port for 4 days, of course, it will be more expensive. But if you're able to pay faster, it has to make your offer competitive. And we have to find the right equation in order to come up with the right price. As Mr. ALAOUI pointed out, or Mrs. ALAOUI pointed out, we needed to have the right price so that all stakeholders will benefit from this
pas du tout des puissants déploiements.
We shouldn't have prices that would prevent the deployment of this electronic payment method.
Moi, je rejoins
C'est Jalal.
ce que dit Cédric. Moi,
l'intervention,
c'est que l'électronique aujourd'hui.
I was saying earlier, electronic payment methods have to be considered a rule. It's a commodity today. Just like, driving your car. It should be the rule to use electronic payment methods.
Est couvert par le juste prix.
And we have to find the right price with an end-to-end service, a digital end-to-end service. And this is something that was mentioned by my colleagues as well. Thank you very much. Because I have to say your comments were extremely relevant. You know that the companies are expecting a lot more advice, support, and content from you. I'd like to thank all those who provided us with their support. Thank you very much. Have an excellent day, and I hope to see you very soon. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to all those who were involved in the organization of this meeting. Thank you very much to all the speakers. And we hope that we will have many challengers. We have a lot of experts. We have a lot of companies who are there at your side, willing to provide you with their full support. Some who haven't been able to make it today, so we remain at your disposal. Thank you.
Bonne journée.
Bonsoir et bon week-end. Merci, au revoir.
Au revoir.